The noose swung gently in the wind, tied to the old church beam like it was waiting for her, and every eye in the town was on Evelyn Moore, the widow who had fed the enemy, the woman who had stood between a dying Apache and a white man's bullet. Preacher refused to say a prayer. The sheriff wouldn't look her in the eye. And from the back of the crowd, a little girl wept quietly, her daughter. Watching her mother get called a traitor in the name of justice, Evelyn didn't flinch, because just 24 hours ago, she'd done the only thing that felt human. It had started at dawn like any other. The chickens hadn't shut up since sunup, and the wind had come up strange, dry and heavy, the kind that carried news before a telegram did. Evelyn was chopping firewood when she heard the groan. She thought it was an animal, maybe a coyote, caught in her fencing, but then she saw him. A man, barely alive. Skin dusted red with blood and dirt, Apache. He had collapsed just past her fence, crawling like a wounded dog, hands stretched toward her well, looked no older than 30, and already halfway to the grave. And behind him, boot prints. Big ones. Fresh. Someone had chased him. The townsfolk would say, "Let him die." That was the rule out here. You didn't help the enemy, no matter how human they looked, especially if you were a woman alone with a child to protect. But Evelyn knelt. Beside him anyway, she took her jug, lifted his head, and let water spill into his mouth. His throat jerked like it hadn't tasted kindness in years. He looked at her eyes, black as coal, yet full of fire. She could have walked away. She should have, instead. She dragged him into her cabin, locked the door, and waited. By sundown, the men of Hollow Creek had gathered at her gate. They had rifles. They had ropes. They had God's name on their lips and hate in their eyes. And now, here she was, standing on a porch with 20 rifles pointed at her. Chest because she had dared to help a man no one else would even bury. The Apache stood behind her now, wrapped in her dead husband's old blanket, still weak, still watching. "You know they will kill you for me," he said quietly. Evelyn didn't. "Blink, then let them watch me burn for doing what was right." The crowd didn't move. Evelyn stood on her porch like a tree refusing to bend. Behind her, the Apache warrior remained still, bandaged, bruised, yet tall. His presence was quiet, but it unsettled them more than a pack of wolves. Sheriff Malden rode forward slowly, boots scraping dust, hand hovering near his holster. "Step aside, Evelyn," he said. "You don't understand what you've done." "I understand better than most," she said, voice calm. "I've buried what hate brings. I won't bury it again." The sheriff's jaw clenched. "That man may have been part of the raids last month. You think just because he bleeds red he's innocent?" Evelyn stepped off the porch. Her boots hit the dirt hard. "I don't know what he's done. Just know what I've done." Murmur swept through the men. Inside the house, little Mary watched from behind a curtain. Her small fingers clutched the edge tight, eyes darting between the window and the wounded man. He hadn't looked at her once. But she didn't feel afraid. She felt something else, like watching a storm roll in. Dangerous, but beautiful. Evelyn turned to the Apache. "Tell me your name." The man hesitated, then answered in a low voice. "Tokata." It meant friend to everyone, though few would understand that. "Can't stay here," Evelyn whispered. "They'll hang you." Tokata looked toward the hills. "Then I'll leave when the sun falls." But as he said it, the sheriff raised his voice again. "He's still here by sundown, Evelyn. I can't stop them. You're harboring the enemy. You'll be charged with aiding a savage." Evelyn turned back, eyes blazing. "No, I'm harboring a man, wounded, bleeding. Same as any of you would be if you fell off your horse and begged at my door." The men stiffened. Few lowered their rifles, but others still gripped them tighter. Then one man spat in the dirt. "Maybe she's just lonely. Maybe she wants Apache company in her bed." The words cut deeper than bullets. Tokata's muscles tense. Evelyn didn't flinch. She looked the man dead in the eyes. "Say that again, and I'll bury you next to you." "My husband." A sharp silence fell. The sheriff sighed. "You have until sundown, Evelyn. After that, I wash my hands of what happens." The mob slowly began to back away, muttering, staring. Judging as the last horse kicked dust into the air, Evelyn turned to Tokata. "Why'd you crawl toward my house?" she asked softly. Takeda looked at her, his voice distant. "Because I was told this place once belonged to Mercy." Cabin was quiet now. Outside, hoofbeats faded into the dust. Inside, the weight of what Evelyn had just done began to settle like smoke after a fire. She poured water into a chipped basin. Her hands, trembling ever so slightly. She wasn't scared. Not exactly. Something in her chest felt heavy, like the moment before a storm breaks loose. Takeda sat near the hearth, his back straight despite the pain in his ribs. The bandage Evelyn had wrapped was stained with blood, but he hadn't made a sound since the mob left. Evelyn finally spoke. "You said this place once belonged to Mercy. Who told you that?" Takeda didn't look up. "My father, before the war took him." She blinked. "Your father knew this land?" He nodded slowly. "He was once a guide, before the treaties broke, before they called us enemies." Evelyn stared at the floorboards. She thought about the stories her husband used to tell, how the land had once been a meeting ground where settlers and tribes traded quietly before greed took over. How kindness was currency, not suspicion. Maybe Mercy did live here once. She stood and reached for a tin of salve. "You're lucky to be alive," Takeda met her eyes. "I didn't come here to survive. Came here because I didn't want to. Die among enemies." His words cut deeper than any wound. She knelt beside him and gently peeled back the bloodied cloth. The sight made her breath hitch, but she kept her hand steady. As she worked, she asked, "You killed anyone?" He didn't answer right away. Finally, he said, "Only those who hunted my people like game." Her throat tightened. "You think I'm a fool?" she whispered. "No," he said. "We're something they've forgotten." She tied off the bandage. Again, then stood. "Rest. You have until sundown. After that, I don't know what happens." Takeda leaned back slowly, eyes closing. "Whatever happens, I will not let them touch you." She looked at him for a long time. A knock suddenly echoed at the door. Not a fist, soft, cautious. Evelyn's heart leapt. She grabbed the rifle and inched toward the entrance. "Who is it?" she called. A young voice answered. "It's me, Miss Evelyn. It's Joseph. My pa doesn't know I came." Evelyn opened the door, just a crack. There stood a gangly 14-year-old boy, straw hair tucked under a dusty cap, sweat beading down his temple. He looked terrified, but not of her. "You gotta be careful," he whispered. "They're talking about coming back early. Some of EMB been drinking, they said. They said they might burn your barn tonight." Evelyn's breath caught. Behind her, Takeda stood tall now, eyes wide open, hand resting on the edge of the fireplace shovel. "Thank you, Joseph," she said quickly, pulling the door closed again. The boy hesitated. "You ain't a bad woman, Miss Evelyn. I don't care what they say." And then he ran. She turned to Takeda, voice low. "If they come tonight, they won't ask questions." Takeda nodded. "Then I will stand." "Oh," she said firmly. "You'll lie down and stay hidden." He looked at her long and hard. Even warriors rest before the next fire. Night came faster than usual, like the sun was running from what the town had planned. The lantern inside Evelyn's cabin flickered, softly throwing long shadows on the wooden walls. Takeda lay still on the old cot, his breathing steady now, but shallow. His wound had stopped bleeding, but the pain remained behind his eyes, not just in his body, but deeper, in a place Evelyn couldn't reach. Mary sat curled in the corner, holding her doll close. "Mama," she whispered, "is he a bad man?" Evelyn looked at her daughter for a long second. "He's a man, Mary. Hurt like anyone else. But the preacher says the preacher ain't God." Mary didn't say another word. She just looked at Takeda, her little brow wrinkled with curiosity. Outside, the wind scraped through the trees like a warning. Evelyn lit another lantern and hung it near the window, casting a glow toward the barn. Every creak of the boards made her heart skip. She stood guard near the window, rifle resting across her arms. Takeda finally spoke, voice low. "You should sleep." She gave a dry laugh. "Not tonight. I've seen men like them before," he said. "When fire and fear Take root, mercy dies. Evelyn turned to him. They're not all monsters. I've seen those same men cry at funerals, hold their children like glass. But fear turns them cruel, and I've seen that too. Tokoda nodded. Fear is the father of hate. Footsteps on the porch. Evelyn spun, heart hammering. A shadow moved past the window. Then another. She whispered, Mary, get under the bed. Now. The girl obeyed without question. Tokoda started to rise, but Evelyn pushed him down. You move and I swear I'll knock you out myself. He gave a tired smirk. You are fiercer than most warriors I know. She crept to the door and peered through the crack. Two figures stood just beyond the porch, holding something. A bucket, suddenly flames. Orange light licked the corner of the barn. Her breath caught in her throat. They were setting fire to it. She yanked open the door and fired one shot into the air. Men scattered like rats. Get off my land. Shh, she shouted into the dark. Fire caught quickly. Dry hay, splintered wood, a summer wind. She ran for the well, bucket in hand. Tokoda appeared behind her, limping but moving fast. He grabbed a second bucket without asking. Together they hauled water, tossed it on the fire, again and again. Duh! The blaze hissed and roared. Mary watched. From the cabin window, eyes wide with fear, by the time the fire choked down to smoke, they were both soaked and gasping. Taya leaned on the well's edge, coughing. Your hands, they bleed. Evelyn looked down, blisters, torn skin. She hadn't even noticed. Doesn't matter, she muttered. She turned to look at the blackened barn. Half of it was gone, supplies destroyed. But the cabin still stood. And so did she. Taco looked at her, eyes unreadable. You saved me, he said, and now I've seen you save your land. She didn't respond. She just looked out into the darkness where shadows still moved. They'll be back. She said, and next time they won't just bring fire. The smell of smoke still hung in the air like a warning from the earth itself. Half the barn was gone. Supplies reduced to ash. Evelyn's nerves felt like cracked glass. Inside the cabin, the lanterns had burned low. Mary was finally asleep, her little hand still gripping her mother's shawl. Evelyn sat by the window with the rifle across her knees. But her eyes didn't close, not once. Tokoda moved slowly, pouring her a cup of water. She accepted it in silence, hands blistered, lips cracked. You shouldn't have fought that fire, she said, her voice hoarse. You're barely standing, he shrugged. The fire was not just yours. Evelyn looked at him. Why do you speak like that? Like what? Like you've seen more than. Your years allow. Tokoda didn't smile, but his eyes softened. 'Cause I have. When my father was killed, I was 12. I watched men laugh as they shot him in the back. They told me I was lucky they let me run. Evelyn's breath caught. I ran for 2 days, slept in trees. Ate bark, he said, voice flat like the memory was burned clean. Then I came back, not for revenge, but to remember. To bury him. Evelyn looked down at her hands. I buried my husband with no one to help, just me and a shovel. He wasn't a soldier, just a man who got caught in a raid. I hated the Apache for years. Tokoda met her gaze. Do you still? She didn't answer right away. Finally, she said, I think I hated what I didn't understand. The silence between them was heavy, but no longer sharp. Just then, a sound. Hooves. Not many, but fast. One-horsed Evelyn grabbed the rifle and peeked through the curtain. A lone rider came flying through the trees and stopped hard at her. Gate. It was Joseph again, the preacher's boy. He was out of breath, hat nearly falling off. She rushed to the porch, rifle lowered but ready. Miss Evelyn? He gasped. They're cumin. The sheriff's trying to stop him, but he can't hold him back. Evelyn's heart sank. How many? Half the town? With torches and guns? They said if you don't give up the Apache by sunrise, they'll take everything. She stepped off the porch, her jaw clenched. Tell your mother to keep you inside tonight. Don't let your PA know you were here. Joseph nodded but didn't leave. He looked past her, saw Tokoda standing. In the doorway? For a second. The boy didn't move. Then he said something no one expected. "I'm sorry they're like this." And he turned and rode off into the dark. Evelyn turned to Tokuda. "If you go now, maybe you can outrun them. Slip through the woods." Tokuda shook his head. "I can't run. Not this time." "Why?" she snapped. "Why stay and get killed? By men who don't care who you are?" Tokuda looked out at the trees, his voice calm but firm. "Because a man who is always hunted eventually forgets what it feels like to stand still." Evelyn swallowed hard. "Then we make a stand." Tokuda looked at her, surprised. "You would fight for me?" She gave a bitter laugh. "I already burned for you. Might as well finish the job." The first rays of dawn had yet to touch the horizon, but the forest was already holding its breath. Inside the cabin, Evelyn boiled water with steady hands, though her shoulders trembled beneath her shawl. She had not slept, neither had Tokuda. They spoke little. Words didn't do much when you were preparing to die. Tokuda sat, sharpening a broken knife. It wasn't much, but it was all he had left. Evelyn kept checking the door, loading shells in two. Her father's old shotgun, Mary, still asleep in the loft, had no idea what the morning would bring. Evelyn had tucked a letter under her pillow the night before. "It's just in case." "Your daughter has her mother's fire," Tokuda said suddenly. Evelyn paused, surprised by his voice. "She has more sense than I ever did. If I were smarter, I'd let you bleed out at the fence." He looked up, dead calm. "If you had, I would have died believing there was no honor left in this world." That made her stop. Evelyn slowly lowered herself into the chair beside him. Honor's in short supply. These days, they sat in silence. The fire cracked between them. Somewhere outside, an owl called once, then went silent. Tokuda said, "I've seen towns burn, seen white men tie boys to trees just because they had war paint on. I've hated deeply." "And now?" Evelyn asked. "I don't know what to feel anymore," he said. "You took me in, fed me, stitched my wound, and you knew it would cost you." She swallowed. "Maybe I'm just tired of being safe." "Or maybe," he said gently, "you remembered you were human." The wind outside had turned colder. A storm was building. Then came a sound, far but certain. Hooves, more than before. Dozens. Headed their way, Evelyn stood. "It's time." Tokuda rose too, slower, but stronger than he looked. She looked at him and said, "You don't have to prove anything." "I'm not," he said. "I'm just done hiding." Together, they moved one loading shells, the other tightening the window boards in the kitchen. Evelyn found the old hatchet her husband had once carved with initials. She hadn't touched it in years. But now she gripped it like memory and steel. The sky outside was starting to pale. Soon they'd be able to see the faces of the ones who came for them. Tokuda looked out the window where the tree line shifted with shadows. "They will try to scare you," Evelyn nodded. "I'm already scared, but I'm not backing down." She placed a rifle on the table, then took another breath. "Tokuda," she said, "if anything happens to me, you take Mary, you get her away from here." He looked at her, really looked. "She is your blood." Evelyn shook her head. "She's your hope now." He didn't argue, just nodded, and then the dog barked. Once, twice. Then came the sound they'd both been waiting for. Boots in the dirt, guns being cocked. Voices rising. The mob had arrived. The sun had not yet risen. But the torches lit the land like a false dawn. Evelyn stood in front of her cabin, both hands gripping her shotgun, boots planted in the dirt she'd walked. For years, her apron still held soot from last night's fire, her fingers raw from hauling water.
Ow.
But none of that showed in her eyes. Only fire did. Across the clearing, nearly 24 men gathered, all familiar faces. Townsfolk she'd served pies to, folks who'd once held her baby at church. Now their faces were twisted with fear, pride, and the kind of righteousness that only comes when a man believes he's doing God's work, no matter who it kills. Sheriff Malden wasn't with them that told Evelyn everything. The leader today was Amos Burke the butcher. A broad man with a voice that carried and a cross hanging from his neck, swinging as he walked forward. "Evelyn," he called out, "we don't want to hurt you. Just want what's inside that house." She didn't blink. "You want a man? Too sick to walk without bleeding?" "We want justice." "Justice," she echoed, voice tight. "For what? For almost dying on my land?" Amos frowned. "He's one of them. His people burned farms, stole horses, maybe worse. If we don't stop them here, where does it end?" "Where it ends," Evelyn said, "is when you stop pretending a dying man is more dangerous than a living coward." Murmurs ran through. The group Toko'd stepped beside her, bandaged, silent, but proud. He stood tall, holding nothing but a piece of broken fence post in his hand. A weapon only in principle. Amos raised his voice. "You defending him means you stand against the town. You're choosing him over us." "I'm choosing what's right," she said. "You can all walk away right now. Go home, hold your children. Let mine live." From the porch, Mary peeked out, eyes wide, clutching her doll to her chest. Someone in the crowd pointed. "She's got a child in there." Evelyn shifted the barrel of her shotgun. "Exactly why none of you will cross this line." The standoff thickened like hot molasses. Then someone fired. A warning shot. Into the sky. The sound cracked like thunder and sent birds flying from the trees. Evelyn didn't flinch, neither did Dakota. But something in the crowd broke loose. Fear, pride, stupidity. A man rushed forward, yelling, a club in his hand. Evelyn raised the shotgun and fired into the dirt in front of him. The blast made him stumble back. Fall, roll in the dust. The mob paused. Evelyn spoke again, louder this time. "This land belonged to no one before any of us were born. You came and called it yours. Now you want blood to keep it. But not here, not today." Another man muttered, "She's gone mad." "She's just lost," someone else said. But Amos wasn't done. "Then we'll burn it all," he growled, "and let the smoke carry her sin to heaven." He raised his hand and torches moved forward. Tokoda whispered, "Let me go." "I'll run. They'll follow me. Spare you." Evelyn stepped in front of him, voice steady. "No one leaves. If they want fire, she'll cock the shotgun. They'll learn what it costs." And then the first torch was thrown. It hit the dirt feet away from the porch, flames crawling like hungry snakes. The first torch landed just shy of the porch, hissed in the dirt, its flame licking the dry ground like a tongue of war. Evelyn stared at it, jaw tight. Her boots didn't move. Tokoda stood behind her, his hands clenched into fists, but his posture calm. He didn't flinch, not even as two more torches flew overhead, one bouncing off the roof, the other crashing into a fence post. The flames caught fast. Wood that had dried through 6 summers lit up like paper. Evelyn raised her voice. "That barn's already burned. That fence too. What else will it take? My blood? My child's?" The crowd hesitated, but not Amos. He stepped forward, raising his rifle now. "You sheltered the enemy. You stand with him. That's a choice. The consequences are yours." "You don't get to talk about choices," Evelyn shouted back. "You let your fear decide for you years ago." Someone from the crowd screamed, "She's pointing a gun at us!" Evelyn barked. Big difference. The standoff cracked again.
How?
More torches were hurled. One hit the porch rail. Flames sparked to life right near her boots. The wood sizzled. Evelyn stepped back once, eyes darting. Dakota moved beside her, picked up the burning rail with his bare hands and tossed it into the yard. His palms blistered instantly, but he didn't make a sound. "Inside," Evelyn yelled. "Get back inside." They ducked into the cabin just as another shot rang out. This one not in the sky. The bullet slammed into the wall just above the doorframe. Mary screamed from the loft. Evelyn turned white. "Stay down." She cried. She ran to her daughter, covered her with her body, heart pounding so hard it felt like thunder in her chest. Tokoda dropped to one knee near the window, peeking out between the shutters. They're breaking apart. A few are waiting, others pushing forward. "What are they waiting for?" Evelyn whispered. Then they heard it, a wagon. Heavy wheels, crunching dry dirt. The sound of wood creaking under weight. God help. Me, Evelyn muttered. They've brought kegs. Tokita stiffened. You mean to burn the whole house? You don't want justice, she said. They want erasure. Crash. The back wall shuddered, someone trying to force their way through. Evelyn rushed to barricade it with the dining table. If we make it to daylight, maybe they'll stop. Tokita didn't answer. He grabbed the broken rifle from the corner. No bullets, just steel and memory. Then dashed through the chaos they heard a voice, firm, familiar. Enough. It came from the edge of the clearing. The crowd froze. Evelyn peeked out the window. It was Sheriff Malden. He rode in alone, coat flapping, shotgun across his saddle. His horse stepped slowly through the smoke. The crowd turned to him, voices rising. Angry, confused. You weren't supposed to stop us, Sheriff. Get out of the way, Malden. But the sheriff didn't move. He looked at Evelyn's burning fence, the shattered porch, the terrified child visible through the glass. Then his eyes found Amos. I said enough, he repeated. Amos growled. You gonna defend her too now? Malden raised his shotgun. You throw one more torch, Amos Burke, and it'll be your last. The wind blew hard across the clearing. Now, carrying smoke, ash, and something else, hesitation. Sheriff Malden sat tall in the saddle, shotgun steady across his knees. His jaw was tight, eyes scanning the mob like a man seeing ghosts where neighbors used to be. I said, drop the torches, he repeated, voice steel. Amos Burke didn't move. His hand still clutched the burning torch, face burning brighter than the flame. She's defending a savage, Amos barked. And you want to stand in the way of justice? Malden raised his shotgun a little higher. You don't get to call it justice just 'cause you're louder, Amos. I know every man here. I married your daughter, buried your brother. Won't watch you become the very thing you claim to hate? Someone in the crowd whispered, maybe the sheriff's gone soft. Be he's one of them now. More murmurs. But no one moved forward. Evelyn, watching from the cabin window, felt the shift, the tide pulling against itself. Then Mary whispered from behind her, Mama, is that man gonna stop them? Evelyn touched her daughter's face, lips pressed tight. He's trying. Baby, he's trying. Outside, Amos hissed, You gonna stop a whole town with one gun? The sheriff didn't blink. Try me. Amos stared for a moment too long, then spat in the dirt and dropped the torch. It landed with a puff of flame before dying out in the dust. The crowd stood still. No one cheered. No one moved. Then from the back, an older man stepped forward. Gray beard, tremble in his hands. We didn't come here to burn a child. It's not what we meant. Malden turned to him. And you shouldn't have followed a butcher with a torch. Whispers again, Evelyn. Pushed the door open and stepped outside, Dakota just behind her. Her clothes were stained with soot. Hair wild, face tired, but her voice had never been stronger. You all know me, she called out, stepping into the open. You've seen me raise my daughter, bury my husband, carry water from that well in the dead of winter. I've fed your sick, lent sugar, patched your shirts. She paused, breathing hard, and still. This is what I get. Flames at my door, guns aimed at my heart. Because I gave a man water. No one answered. You want to call me a traitor? Fine, but don't pretend it's about him. This isn't about race, or raids, or land. It's about fear. You were afraid, and now you want someone to bleed for it. Her voice cracked, but only a little. Tokita stepped beside her. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His silence was louder than their shame, and slowly, and began to lower their heads. One by one, torches were dropped. A rifle was set on the ground. Then another. Amos stood alone now. Sheriff Malden looked at him. Go home, Amos, or I'll drag you in myself. The butcher stared at Evelyn one last time, then turned and walked off into the trees. The mob broke apart. Men followed. Horses turned. Silence fell, heavy and strange. Evelyn stood in the middle of the yard, hands trembling, heart pounding, breath sharp like ice in her throat. And then it was over. The mob was gone. Smoke still curled upward from the half-burnt fence, and the ground was littered with scorched torch heads and boot prints. But the danger had passed. For now Evelyn stood still in the yard for a long while after the last man disappeared behind the tree line. Her legs wanted to buckle, but she didn't let them. Dakota was beside her, silent as ever, but his chest rose and fell with the slow breath of someone who had lived through something most men didn't survive twice. The sheriff dismounted, hitting the dirt with a heavy thud. He looked older in that moment, not because of age, but because of disappointment. "You all right?" he asked. Evelyn turned to him slowly. "I don't even know what that means anymore." He nodded gently. "They won't be back. Not like that." She eyed him, wary. "Not like that doesn't mean never. You shamed them, Evelyn. Not with bullets. With truth." He paused. "That sticks deeper than lead." Her eyes softened. "I'm not a hero." "You didn't have to be," he said. "You just had to be human." Behind them, Mary peered from the cabin doorway, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Evelyn went to her, scooped her up even though her arms ached like firewood cracked too many times. Mary buried her face in her mother's neck. Sheriff Malden looked toward Dakota now. They locked eyes to men on opposite ends of survival. "I can't say the town will welcome you," he said slowly, "but I won't let them lynch you. Either, not on my watch." Dakota gave a small nod. The sheriff added, "If you plan to stay, it'll be a hard life." Dakota finally spoke, voice rough but composed. "Every life is hard when men forget they share the same sky." Malden studied him for a long beat, then tipped his hat. "Well, you've earned at least one day in peace." He mounted his horse and rode off without another word. Evelyn carried Mary inside and set her down gently. The house was in shambles. Furniture overturned. Glass cracked. Smoke smell in every board. But they were alive. She lit a small lamp and sat beside Dakota at the table. Neither of them spoke for a while. Finally, Evelyn said, "They'll talk about this day for years. They'll lie about it," Dakota replied quietly. "Then we'll keep the truth between us." Dakota looked at her, really looked, not as a rescuer, not as a woman who'd given him shelter, but as something more painful and beautiful, a witness. Outside, the sun finally cracked the horizon. Golden light poured in through the dusty window, cutting across the table and bathing them both. In the kind of quiet that only comes after something has been nearly lost forever, Evelyn poured water into a tin cup and slid it toward him. "I don't know what tomorrow looks like," she said. Takeo took the cup, and we'll start with today. By mid-morning, the smoke had thinned, but the silence felt heavier than before. The cabin had survived, but barely. Evelyn moved slowly through her home, resetting chairs, lifting broken crockery like it was made of memory. Each shattered plate reminded her of something she'd lost, or maybe something she'd protected. Mary sat on the floor drawing on a scrap of paper, her doll beside her, bandaged with a strip from Evelyn's old apron. Dakota helped where he could. His limp was worse now. The swelling in his side had turned dark under the bandages, but he moved with quiet dignity, replacing fallen shutters. Brushing soot from the porch with his sleeve, Evelyn came out carrying a bucket. She stopped when she saw him kneeling at the edge of the garden. "What are you doing?" she asked, returning your land to silence. She watched as he gently dug at the dirt, his hand pressing into the earth like he was listening to something. It remembered, smoothed the soil around one of the crushed tomato plants. Evelyn's throat tightened. "That's not going to grow." Dakota looked up at her. "Maybe not." She lowered the bucket, stood. Beside him, "You ever think of leaving? Going west, maybe? Starting somewhere else?" "I've thought about it every day," he said. "But I keep waking up in the same place." "Why?" He brushed dirt from his hands. "Because even land that's been burned can still grow something honest." Evelyn sat beside him, her fingers unconsciously brushing the soil too. Moment, the war, the fire, the fear, all of it felt like smoke passing in the wind. Then she asked, quietly, "Do you think they'll try again?" Dakota didn't answer right away.
Ouch.
"Not all enemies come with torches. Some just stop." looking you in the eye that hit harder than any threat. She nodded slowly. So what do we do? We endure, he said. Just then, sound of wheels, a wagon broke through the stillness. They both stood quickly. A covered cart appeared at the edge of the trail. Evelyn reached for her rifle out of habit, but Takoda stopped her. It's not fear, he said. Look. Joseph, the preacher's son, stepped down from the wagon with his mother beside him. The boy looked nervous, but in the cart were sacks of flour, cloth, and lumber. Evelyn stepped down the porch.
Why are you?
Here, Joseph's mother answered softly. Because we saw your fire and didn't come running. Oh, we were wrong. The woman stepped forward, placed a small bundle in Evelyn's arms, cloth diapers, canned peaches, a folded note that simply read, "For Mary. From someone who should have stood beside you last night." Evelyn's voice trembled. I didn't. Ask for charity. The woman shook her head. It's not charity. It's what neighbors are supposed to be. Toko stood a little behind, watching, didn't speak. But in his eyes, Evelyn saw something she hadn't seen since her husband died. Hoped as the wagon pulled away. She looked back at Tokuda. They're still afraid. Yes, he said. But they're also ashamed. That's how change begins.
Ellen
Looked around her burned yard, then back at her daughter. Playing in the dirt like nothing had happened. Then maybe this isn't the end, she whispered. Takoda looked at her, voice low. No. This is the beginning of the hard part. The days after the fire passed quietly, but not without weight. Every corner of Evelyn's land still held the scent of smoke and something deeper memory. Not all of it kind. The townsfolk hadn't returned in anger, but they hadn't returned much at all, and yet the mornings began the same way now. Takoda rising first, fetching water from the well even when his leg ached. Evelyn tending the animals, what few were left. And Mary, barefoot and laughing, chasing, shadows in the yard like nothing had burned at all. It was in that stillness that something unspoken began to bloom. One afternoon, Evelyn stood on the porch mending a tear in Mary's dress. Her eyes drifted to the yard, where Mary sat under the big sycamore tree with Tokuda. A simple scene, but it made her stop sewing. Mary was drawing in the dirt with a stick, occasionally glancing up at him, like she was trying to read a man who spoke in silences. And Takoda, he wasn't teaching or correcting, just watching, listening, nodding gently now and then. Then Mary picked a smooth stone from the grass and handed it to him. He studied it, then pointed to a ridge in the rock. That is where the water wore it down. Mary traced the line, so it's not broken. No, he said, it's changed. She looked up. Mama says people can't change. Takuda paused, eyes flickering toward the cabin. She's wrong. May people change when they're seen. Mary tilted her head. Do you see me? He didn't smile. That! Something lit behind his tired eyes. Yes, the little girl leaned against his side. I see you too. From the porch, Evelyn's needle froze mid-stitch. She felt something twist inside her, something not quite pain, but not peace either. That night, by lamplight, Evelyn placed the finished dress on Mary's bed and turned to find Tokuda leaning against the doorframe. She talks about you, Evelyn said, not looking up. I know. She says you don't. Tell her what to think. You just let her. Tokuda stepped inside slowly. She doesn't need to be told. She needs to be believed. Evelyn nodded, almost to herself. I didn't plan any of this, she said. You, her. This, neither did I. She's not your responsibility. No, he said, voice low. But I owe her something. She didn't flinch when the others ran. She didn't judge. And when I sat in silence, she heard me anyway. Evelyn looked at him then. And what do you owe me? Takoda met her gaze unblinking. Everything. Silence passed between them. Not heavy. Not broken, just true. Later that night, Evelyn lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Takuda asleep on the floor nearby. The house creaked with old age and wind. But it no longer felt like something falling apart. It felt lived and whole. In a way fire couldn't undo it. It was long past midnight. The fire in the hearth had turned to ember, but neither Evelyn nor Tokoda slept. The cabin was silent, except for the wind brushing the shutters and the slow, steady rhythm of Mary's breathing from the loft. Evelyn sat at the kitchen table, wrapping a cut on her hand. A shard of glass from 2 days ago had finally pushed through. She winced, but didn't complain. Tokoda watched from across the table. "You should have let me help," he said. "I've had worse." "That doesn't mean you should carry it alone." Evelyn looked up sharply, but her reply never came. Instead, a long silence stretched between them, the kind of silence that feels heavy, not because of what's missing, but because of what's finally about to break. Tokoda reached into his coat and pulled out a small, worn pouch. He opened it and slid something across the table. A pendant, old, simple, carved bone in the shape of a bird in flight. Evelyn picked it up. "What is this?" "My brother made it," Tokoda said quietly. "The day before he died." Her hand froze. "I was there," he continued. "When the soldiers came, they burned our shelter, took the horses, shot him when he tried to run. I dragged his body for miles, buried him with a broken branch because I had no tools." Evelyn stared at the charm. "I'm sorry." He was 16. Her throat tightened. Tokoda leaned back, eyes dim but clear. "I joined a raid 2 years later. Took back cattle from settlers. One of them fought, a man. He shot one of my brothers. I killed him." Evelyn's hands gripped the edge of the table. "I didn't know he had a wife," Tokoda said. "Or a daughter." She looked up. "I only found out later," he continued. "A man in town said he'd once seen me, that I killed a rancher named James Hart." The name hit her like a knife. Evelyn's breath caught. "My husband was James Hart." Silence got cold. Sudden, shocking. Neither moved. Neither blinked. Tokoda's voice lowered to a whisper. "I thought so, but I wasn't sure until now." Evelyn stood, not fast, not slow, like her legs were no longer part of her. "I let you into my home," she whispered. "I know. You ate from my table, held my child." He nodded once, eyes locked on hers. "You killed him?" Tokoda didn't answer. He didn't have to. And yet she didn't scream, didn't reach for the gun, didn't throw him out into the night instead. She sat back down, hands shaking. "I hated the men who took him from me," she said. "I hated your kind, all of you. Every single one." Tokoda said nothing, but then I saw you bleed. And still stand. I saw my daughter smile for the first time in months. I saw you, and I forgot how to hate. Tears welled up in her eyes, but didn't fall. "So what now?" she asked. "What are we?" Tokoda's voice trembled, not from fear, from something deeper. "To people who know what it means to lose." The pendant still sat on the table, untouched. Neither Evelyn nor Tokoda had moved since their last words. Outside, the wind howled softly through the trees, but inside, it was the silence between two hearts that made the walls feel thinner than ever before. Evelyn finally stood, slowly, as if her bones had to decide whether to move forward or fall apart. Tokoda remained seated, hands resting on his knees, waiting like a man who had already accepted whatever punishment would come. "I don't know what to feel," she said, voice low. "Grief has lived with me for years, made it my shadow, and now I don't know who I'm angry at anymore, you or the war that made you." "I didn't come here to be forgiven," Tokoda replied. "Only to die somewhere quiet." "You almost did," she said, "but you didn't." Tokoda looked at her, eyes tired but still burning with something too raw to name. "Why didn't you let them finish me that night?" She stepped closer, as I didn't see a killer. Saw a man whose blood matched the dirt on my land. Swallowed hard. I wasn't just the man who ended James Hart's life. I was the boy who buried his own father with his bare hands. The boy who grew up learning the world didn't want him to live unless he bowed. "And James," she asked, "was he your enemy?" "No, just in the way." Evelyn flinched, but then quietly she sat down again. "And now?" She whispered. "I don't know," Tokoda replied. "But Mary, she sees me as something other than what I was, and that makes me want to become it. Evelyn's eyes filled again, not with rage but ache. The ache of everything she had believed unchangeable. Beginning to shift, she reached for the pendant and closed it in her fist. "When you killed him," she said, "you ended the only life I thought I'd ever have. But when you stepped onto this land half dead, you gave me a second one." Looked up, startled. "Evelyn." "Tss. I don't forgive you," she said firmly. "Not yet. Maybe not ever." He nodded. "But I won't let hate raise my daughter," she added. "I won't let ghosts run my house." She placed the pendant back on the table. "This belongs here now with the other scars." Tokuda closed his eyes, as if breathing. For the first time that night, Evelyn didn't sleep in her bed. She laid on the floor beside Mary's little cot, while Tokuda rested near the hearth. For the first time, no walls stood between them, only memory, and the choice of what to do with it. The days turned slow again. No more torches, no more guns. Just the sound of wind brushing tall grass, the creak of porch wood, and the rhythm of chores stitched back into the land like old prayer. Evelyn found herself waking up with less weight in her chest, the kind that used to steal her breath in. The mornings it had softened, not vanished, but softened. Toka stayed. He didn't ask to. She didn't ask him to leave. Their words had grown fewer, but fuller. The silences between them no longer cut. They held space. Mary called him K.O., not father, not stranger, just K.O. Her own name for something she didn't quite know how to label. Maybe that was better. Labels were what nearly burned their world down. One morning, Evelyn stepped outside with a tin cup of coffee and found Tokuda already in the garden, tending the line of tomato plants they thought had died. She leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, hair braided tight, like her mother once did. "They're sprouting again," she said. He didn't look up. "I told you. Roots remember." She smiled faintly. "Right." He finally looked at her. "You never said that before. Never meant it before." That night they shared supper at the table, not like guests, not like strangers, but like something in between. Mary chattered about the birds she saw nesting in the barn wall. Evelyn watched her daughter more than she listened. When Mary had gone to bed, Evelyn poured 2 cups of coffee. The silence lingered, but no longer. Waited for anything to be said. Just was, "I don't know what we are," she said quietly. "A widow, a warrior, a child between us. A house scarred by fire." Tokuda nodded. "It's not a family yet." She looked at him, but it's something. Evelyn leaned back in her chair. "Will you ever leave?" Tokuda answered without pause. "Not unless you ask me." 2. She did. The next morning the townspeople sent word. The preacher's wife invited Mary to Sunday school. Joseph came by to return the pot he borrowed, now full of warm bread. No apology. But a kind of peace offering. Evelyn accepted it without a word. That night, she placed the bird pendant in a small box beside her husband's photo. She looked at James for a long time. "I still miss you," she whispered. "But I don't hate him anymore." And then for the first time in years, she wept without bitterness. The land healed slowly, but it healed, and every morning, Mary's laughter danced across it like spring finally dared to return. Asterisk, if this story stirred your heart, made you feel something deeper. Subscribe to Luminous Tales. We tell stories not just to remember, but to heal, one tale at a time.